Welcome to this edition of Excavating the Bible, what archaeology can teach us. This program is dedicated to exploring contributions from people who work in the Middle East in archaeology to our understanding of and appreciation for the Bible. I'm Doug Clark of the Center for Near Eastern Archaeology at La Sierra University, normally joined by co-host Dr. Larry Garrity. He is on assignment. And we have as our regular conversation partner Dr. Kent Bramlett, who is an associate professor of archaeology and the history of antiquity at La Sierra University, walking through this long list, this long set of episodes on archaeology in the Bible, book by book. Thank you for your many contributions.
Well, it's an interesting journey to go through it like this.
It really is. It's maybe not like walking the Bible, but maybe like the name of our program. It's excavating the Bible, but it's doing it book by book. And for this particular episode, we're turning our attention to the book of Proverbs, a wisdom book. So what other wisdom books do we have in the Bible? We'll think about some parallels outside too.
Well, usually we would put Job in that category, that genre, Ecclesiastes. There are a number of other books that aren't in the Bible but were important in intertestamental times or in the New Testament times. But these have a different approach, don't they?
They do. I read a book one time, and I'm not sure that I agree with it entirely, but the title, just to be stark about it, since it doesn't, wisdom literature doesn't seem to be so religious. And the name of the book was In Man We Trust, In Mankind We Trust, and of picking up on In God We Trust. And it wasn't a way of saying we don't have religious roots, but it's a way of saying that wisdom literature seems to be more cosmopolitan, more universal.
It's not covenant-oriented, unlike the histories that we've been working through. It is a very different take on life, or at least a different angle, a different insight to life in this world.
When standing at a different part of the intersection, looking at it through a different set of lenses. And with these lenses, at least in the Bible, and we probably can't, well, in some ways we could probably find the same parallels in the ancient Near East. Job and Ecclesiastes, what should we call that kind of wisdom?
Well, it's a philosophical, I mean, it's looking at the moral foundations and trying to understand evil, good and evil. Proverbs never really enters that conversation. Proverbs is a more practical type of wisdom literature. I've always looked at Proverbs as very different. They're not promises.
We have to remember that. These are not, talk about Bible promises. These are what? The way things normally happen.
And my favorite illustration of that is Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5. The first one, verse 4, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be, wise in his own eyes. And the other one is, answer a fool according to his folly.
So he won't be that.
So he won't be, yeah, exactly. So there we have the exact opposite, and they're back to back. So clearly, I think it takes, again, wisdom to apply the right proverb to the right time and place.
That's probably a nice way to think about being wise. Being wise doesn't mean having all the knowledge. Being wise, at least in the biblical sense, is to know when to use and apply which of these proverbs.
Right.
And when to behave like a fool, when not to. So one has to think about the
That's why you have these great collections. It's almost like a farmer's almanac. It's advice for every time and place in life. And then a wise, experienced person, one who, with wisdom from God, knows when to apply which proverb.
Okay, a personal question, Kent. Did your parents like, when you were growing up, to go to the Proverbs? I mean, there's so much wisdom there, so much about how to live, how to behave. Did your parents like the book? I know your parents.
Yes.
Did they go to the book of Proverbs occasionally?
Well, I think there probably was some reference to the book of Proverbs. But I do remember the first time I read through cover to cover, front to back,
Yeah.
this Proverbs in Academy. And I greatly enjoyed it. Well, the extended dialogues, the first 10 chapters, but then just the collections. So yeah, I think in every household there's a time and a place for a well-placed proverb.
That's right. And the kind of the pragmatism, the practical value is settled into the theology of Deuteronomy, that this kind of action leads to this kind of outcome. Whereas Job, Ecclesiastes, this more speculative or philosophical wisdom, tends to critique, tends to be willing to say, does it work like that? Does it work every time like that? And then what do we do differently if in fact it doesn't? So these two, all in the same Bible, next to each other, these varying perspectives. So
Right. I think that's part of what makes the Bible such a rich document that speaks to every time and place. And the Proverbs, while they don't question those foundations like Ecclesiastes does, which we'll look at in probably next week.
Yes.
But Proverbs, nevertheless, I think it doesn't take entirely blind view to the possibilities of the world, but it is more predictable.
Predictability is good, yeah.
And do this to prosper.
Right. Parents like predictability, right?
They do.
So this at least for young children, to have something kind of foundational like this, and easy to remember, easy to apply next time you find yourself in a situation like the Proverbs describes. So, before we look at some of the Proverbs and compare them with ancient Near Eastern parallels, we have some artifacts which we are tying to the book of Proverbs. In what ways? And what do we have?
Well, we have artifacts that we think illustrate some of the themes in Proverbs. Domestic life, activities of scribes. Beginning down here, we have, well, again, daily types of artifacts. A cooking pot, a vessel, a jar could have been filled with water or olive oil, again, for cooking. The meals would be prepared, again, over the hearth, the home hearth, and the grain would be ground with a grindstone. We think, again, of some of the Proverbs which refer to the tasks of women in the household.
Yes.
Again, grinding, a small mortar and pestle, and other grinding stones. We might even put it this way. And you can grind spices.
And probably, if I'm thinking about the references you just noted, probably Proverbs 31 with the ideal housewife. I think that's a fairly popular name. I'm not sure everybody likes that title for it, but where the woman does all of these things.
Well, she certainly moves beyond this sphere into the production
and even
modes.
above that, she moves above. I mean, we're talking managerial in many ways. So now you've talked about food, but what's happening here?
Well, here we have industries. Again, production of, well, these are spindle whorls for spinning different sizes of threads. Very fine weights would be used for spinning linens. Heavier weights, again, placed on a vertical shaft, and then you spin them like this and make the wool. They didn't have the spinning wheels that we think of from colonial periods. Sewing, well, first you need to make the cloth, so you have loom weights each of the major...
This would be a vertical loom?
A vertical loom would be hung with a weight, and then the horizontals would be woven through. We have needles, again, for sewing clothing from the cloth. So the whole production stage here is represented.
And then if we move over here, have several pendants. So we're talking about ornamentation. That would certainly be a part of...
Many Proverbs about ornament.
And you have Proverbs, and wisdom is pictured as a use of metaphor of a pendant. A pendant is like wisdom that you wear around your neck. Keep it close. I mean, it is on you.
And what would you do with it? Not like a ring in a pig's snout. That would be a misuse of wisdom.
Right. You're picking up on some of your grandmother's Proverbs, I think.
I think maybe so.
And then some writing tablets. One, a clay tablet written with cuneiform that is impressed with a stylus in the soft clay and then fired hard. And then an ostrakhan. We'll be looking at different writing materials. In fact, we'll be looking at the whole scribal tradition in ways that I think are going to be fun as well as educational.
We have collections from Wow, for over 2,000 to 3,000 years, we have collections of Proverbs on all of these media.
We do, and we want to think about that range of media, the various types of materials that were used in preserving these Proverbs for us. And so we'll do that. Let's think about the book itself and turn to the outline. The word collection in this outline, I think, is instructive. Even if we read the names Solomon or Hezekiah or Agur, these things are collected. They don't have to be written by somebody to be in a collection. And that may help us understand why some of these proverbs show up everywhere.
Some of the very same ones we find
exactly.
in other
we'll see some of those
collections.
In this episode.
Exactly.
And maybe this is such a strong tradition, probably, at least a number of people would say, beginning in nomadic settings, where things were passed on. And of course, Proverbs are memorable. They're short, they're cryptic, they are crisp, and you remember them not just because your grandmother told you, but because they either rhyme or have some kind of depth to them, and you just can't forget them. You can't get them out of your mind. So these collections, people saw those, and so they brought them in to their own. So you'd probably have some that were mixed.
And the connection with kings. A wise king is highly valued, and how better to represent that than with collections of their
So the origins, if
Proverbs.
The scholars are correct, in some sort of nomadic setting, certainly doesn't stay there long. Ends up as what, kind of the purview of royal families, and at least
and the
of
scribal
royalty.
traditions that are available to
Right.
Those settings.
And the Egyptians place, I don't have a slide here, but the Egyptians place scribes. They're not far from the royalty. Sometimes they're separated by soldiers, and there'd be noble people, but below them are pretty much everybody else, So we'll think about that in the process. So we have several collections, and you notice some of them come from people we would know from the Bible, like Solomon and Hezekiah. Lemuel, that great last chapter that actually has two parts to it. One of them has to do with alcohol, basically, drinking. And then the last part of it has to do with this ideal housewife. So an interesting collection, but we should keep the word collection there, pulling these things together from all kinds of sources. We've talked a bit about this, Kent, the different wisdom traditions and literature. We will think more about that with some of our examples. Egypt and Mesopotamia seem to show up as the primary, sources that maybe kind of infiltrated the rest of the ancient Near East?
And of course, they had such long-standing tribal traditions, and we have the texts from those countries. We don't have them from the Canaanites for the most part. So we're missing part of the record, but we have represented in these two locations great collections.
So we're going to look at some of these evidences that we're talking about right here. The separation of wise and fools, that seems to come up in...
It's a popular theme.
A very popular theme, as well as elites and the poor, and this usually has to do with justice in those sort of contexts. Everyday imagery, we've looked at some of the artifacts that suggest that. Windows, cisterns, domestic settings, these all, even medicine, come up in these proverbs. Probably, again, because they were pulled together from so many different places and put into a collection for our enjoyment and our benefit. And we are very grateful they did. So some of the artifacts, we will look at some scribal implements and scribal history and depictions of scribes at work. And pendants we've already looked at on the table. We will look at some, we actually have also looked at some domestic implements that would especially be tied to Proverbs 31. Okay, what is this, Kent?
Well, it's a inkwell, or that stands for ink, for writing. And in Egypt, the scribes were usually seated, so they'd be holding the stylus and writing, so they would need to reach beside them and dip and write and dip.
A tradition that has lasted to this day in many ways. What are these?
These are some of the pens. So again, this would be for writing hieroglyphs in the Egyptian tradition.
Right. And somehow, would they trail much ink, or would you just constantly be dipping?
I think you'd be dipping just like a quill later on,
Right.
but here they're using reeds.
Right. So we have some of these. And some ancient, some ancient depictions of ancient scribes at work. Here, Egyptian.
Usually seated, cross-legged, with the writing material on their lap.
The picture on the right appears to be a scroll. Well, maybe on both of them. On their left hand is kind of a rolled portion.
Looks like it.
So that would be made out of.
Well, that would be papyrus, probably,
so
from Egypt.
We'll actually see some of that. A depiction, okay? But I think it comes from one of the tomb walls. This one, a relief. So scribes at work. Again, Egyptian. We're still talking about Egyptian. And if in Egypt scribes were given this higher status, then we can see why there's so much depicted about them in these funerary contexts.
Right, one of the very important positions in the administration.
Right. I don't know what kind of pay they got for that important position, but...
Well, in a sense, they had the keys to the afterworld. They were the ones that would paint and write the incantations. We know some of the tombs of these individuals, they also decorated their tombs with the proper incantations, so they probably thought they had the keys to the afterworld. So that maybe was part of the pay.
That could help. That would be good motivation. Here's another Egyptian one. I think, Kent, you were talking about the script here is late, represents something
seems to
quite
be,
late.
yeah.
But still, scribes at work. I'm not sure what the person in the middle is doing. There's people active scribally on both sides, but I'm not sure what's
This is a pupil.
It may be a pupil. Somebody's learning. Apprentice. Okay, Babylon. Who's King Marduk?
Well, Marduk was the original patron god of Babylon. And when other cities in Mesopotamia were preeminent, their gods were much higher. So when in the period of the Babylonian rise to the preeminent city, Marduk rises along with the city. So heaven reflects earth in this case. So Marduk is elevated to the high god of the pantheon.
And Marduk becomes the deity tied to the primary Babylonian creation story, doesn't it?
Right, and that's a development. If you look at the older texts, he's not fulfilling that in that role.
So somebody has done for Marduk what biblical writers actually, in many ways, probably do when they talk about God, but they use the language and the analogies and the metaphors and the stories that everybody knew, but now change those names and give it a redemptive flavor.
Right.
But here, a strong political flavor.
It's very political, yes.
Very political. And the scribe, I mean, here are flowers being presented by the king to the scribe, whose name means what?
Well, Ibn Ishtar, the son of Ishtar.
Of the goddess, huh?
The goddess.
So this is pretty high. I mean, that means we're at least as high as Egyptian perceptions.
I mean,
scribes.
direct contact here with royalty and very high name as well.
Right. And Mesopotamia, again, a relief here showing scribes at work. We have something here of Assyrian scribes. The other one was relief. This is more of just a two-dimensional artwork. Now, if we talk about materials, so what kinds of materials do we have, Kat? What is this one on?
Well, this is an ostracon, again, written on it's a small note written on a potsherd. Many of them were sort of drafts, if you have a letter. But other times they might have just used them for a quick receipt or a record of what's coming into the temple or the royal storehouses. And that seems to be the case here for Samaria. These date from the late 8th century. And they just record the taxes coming in, so we have produce from the different districts around Samaria. But look at the beautiful script.
Well, I was going to ask you, so why would scribes go to the trouble of making spectacularly beautiful scripts if they're just tax receipts? I mean, well, that's not how we normally associate a tax collection.
This is their profession, and it's an important one. I think they're proud of their occupation, what they can do.
It is beautiful, flowing, beautiful. Okay, a couple of other types of material.
Right, on the papyrus there on the right, probably the most common writing material in Egypt, certainly. Exported as well.
And this one is from about 200 or so BC, so this is quite late.
And on the left we have another ostracon, so it's on a piece of pottery. written with ink. The letters are written in ink. And we have quite a corpus from Arad
From
at this
Arad,
time. Yeah.
southern Israel.
It's a border post, really, where the Arabian trade comes into Judah.
And I think there was recent research done on the Arad letters that might say something about literacy at a different level than we've been thinking.
Right, there was a recent analysis that was published looking at how many authors are represented, how many scribes. And I mean, there's a handful, but the suggestion was that that's more than one might expect if you only had, one or two scribes appointed in the administration, suggesting that literacy was more widespread than many people had assumed for that time.
Interesting to keep in mind. In spite of the fact that we see so much biblical literature that would resonate so well in an oral culture, literacy seems to be more broad spread, as you mentioned. A number of people have done studies on education in ancient Israel. And so that study that you just mentioned is going to play a part in ongoing discussions about education. So some regular skin or vellum scrolls. A favorite stone of yours and mine?
Well, it is, yes. I mean, that's the key that unlocked Egyptian hieroglyphic writing, discovered by Napoleon. One of his officers took credit for finding it. It was probably some ditch digger that actually came upon it. But the three languages, the parallel text, is what was really the key. We could read the classical Greek, or people could at that time in the early 1800s. Couldn't read either of the Egyptian versions or the full classical hieroglyphs or the later Demotic, but by identifying, first of all, names in the cartouches and then working out sound correspondences, they began to work back, and also utilizing Coptic. So the language which is still the religious, liturgical language for the Coptic Christians.
Right. So you're okay with this discovery since you're teaching the hieroglyphs, and we now know what we can say of the hieroglyphs.
Right.
And what they mean.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at some inscriptions, these from outside the Bible, but we'll hear resonances. We'll hear a number of echoes. So the teachings of Keti, 2nd millennium BC. This is known by some, identified by some, as a kind of a satire on employment, at least employment opportunities. And he's going to build a case that being a scribe is the only real way to do this. So we've got 3 different slides on this. Kent, read it to us.
Learn to write, my son. I have seen how many other kinds of work destroy workers. Learning to write can save you from all this suffering. As it says in the book of Goals, become a scribe, fulfilling others' needs, and you will never be poor. No other profession may make this claim. I will make you see that writing is to be loved, even more than your mother.
That's profound. Or
I'm not
maybe,
sure what the mother would say about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure we want to go that way either. Okay, and it goes on.
The woodcutter is more wretched than a farmer. The jeweler works hard stones every day. The barber shaves from dawn until dusk, makes himself a slave to the chins of the world.
I love that.
The potter is condemned to dwell in the clay while still among the living. The gardener bears a yoke. The fisherman's job is worst of all.
And then the concluding part about why you really should be a scribe.
If you know how to write, you will do better than any of these other workers. You will be your own boss. It is my responsibility to make this journey with you to the city where the Pharaoh sits. Your time as an apprentice is no more than a day. Your work as a scribe will last for an eternity, longer than the mountains. The time will pass quickly, very quickly.
What a great way to talk about, or to encourage people to think about becoming scribes. Just play against these other...
It's interesting to see the descriptions of the other professions.
It is, through the eyes of this scribe. And of course the scribes controlled the media, so,
Right.
had to pay attention to them. Another text, the teachings or wisdom of Ptahhotep. Let me read this one. My students, in all things, be intelligent, not arrogant. Be wise, not overconfident. Seek advice from the powerless, as well as from the powerful. No one ever reaches one's full potential. There's always more to learn. Wisdom hides like emeralds, but it can always be uncovered. If you become a messenger for the powerful, this is advice. If you work for the powerful, if you become a messenger for the powerful, be completely reliable on every assignment. No questions asked. Carry out your orders to the letter. Withhold nothing, forget nothing, forge nothing, repeat nothing, embellish nothing. That's a great way to capture it. And then another thing here with the students, be wise, not overconfident. I'm sorry, I read that one. If you're to become the father of a household or are a household guest, stay away from the women of the house. Keep your mind on business and off of the pretty faces. So some practical sort of make sure you're paying attention to.
Sounds like the early part of Proverbs.
It does. There are a lot of connections here. And then another one here from Ptahhotep. Guided by teachers' instructions. At the very end, the wise rise early to start to work. Fools rise early to worry about all there is to do. These are great. The underlying humor is really interesting. Okay, Amen Mope. Read a couple things.
Listen to what I say. Learn my words by heart. Prosperity comes to those who keep my words in their hearts. Poverty comes to those who discard them. Enshrine my words in your souls. Lock them away in your hearts. When the words of fools blow like a storm, the words of the wise will hold like an anchor. Stop and think before you speak. It is a quality pleasing to the divine assembly.
Assembly again. We've seen that again. The notion here is so catching. It's pleasing. Rather than say, don't anger the gods, be careful what you say. That's pleasing. That's a nice positive motivation. Okay, a couple more.
Stolen goods only spend the night. At dawn they vanish. Dawn reveals where the stolen goods spent the night, but they have vanished. At night, the earth opens its mouth and renders the verdict on stolen goods.
What a nice way to say, don't pick up anybody else's things. Okay, another one.
Do not make fun of the blind. Do not tease the dwarf. Do not trip the lame. Do not tease the insane. Do not lose patience with them when they are wrong. Humans are clay and straw. The divine assembly is their sculptor.
Isn't that a nice way to put it? Don't tease, don't trip, don't make fun of, because we're all clay and straw, and it was God or the gods who made us this way. So, we're unique. So don't bully, don't, treat other people abusively.
Spare the rod, spoil the child.
Have we heard that one before?
That's one of the most widely known, isn't it? Lions ambush stags, shed their blood, eat their meat. So it is when humans meet.
That's discouraging, but maybe it is the
rather
case.
True to life.
In many cases, it is true to life. One more.
Two kinds of people are a delight. A third pleases Shamash, the divine overseer. Those who share their wine, those who follow good advice, those who can keep secrets. Choose words carefully to teach another. The word is mightier than the sword.
Thank you, Kent. The notion here, this first one, is a numerical proverb. For three things. Sometimes it's for three things and for four. But this is a nice one. We see a lot of those in the book of Proverbs.
We do.
So thank you. And thank all of you for joining us for this episode of Excavating the Bible. We hope this has been helpful, and we do look forward to next time. Until then, think ancient, keep believing, and keep exploring. For Excavating the Bible, I'm Doug Clark.